So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. This is our review of the year 2021. The title is Another Turbulent Year, and it certainly has been. I think that's a bit of an understatement. I did think about introducing this meeting by citing what had happened month by month across this year, but there was so much. I thought, no, I won't do that. I'm just going to pick out January because we started the year with the storming of the Capitol building in the US. I think that was the 6th of January, and it was televised, and it was absolutely shocking to see that the way that fascists and the Proud Boys and the right wing were able to do what they did, now we're in December, but at the end of last month we saw the new variant emerge. So I mean, every single month we have just seen one turbulent wave of problems, deepening crises after another, more flashpoints, more conflict. We see a real deepening poverty in this country and across the world, the impact of austerity and the horrors of war heaped upon the working class. But in contrast to that, we've got billionaire heirs being rocketed into space and then having the temerity to go on TV and thank their workers for the low wages that they've been getting, that allows those billions to be accrued. And you know, such an obscenity of a society and a system, a global system that's working very much for the few and not the many. Now, there's been uprisings and protests on a global scale, movements that are challenging the system. I mean, I think in the past, when there have been massive challenges to the system, or we've been in pre-revolutionary and revolutionary situations, that's mainly been located in Europe. I mean, the working class internationally has really grown. And we've seen protests, and I'm just going to name a couple of countries, and I'm sure that comrades a bit later on will come in and tell me that I've missed something. I'm missing out a lot because I'm just really skating across the surface. But I just wanted to mention one or two places, such as Nigeria, Sudan, in Hong Kong and Thailand, upheavals in Haiti, the Philippines, Ecuador and Brazil, where we're seeing massive movements around burning of the Amazon rainforest, the persecution of indigenous people, etc. And in India, now India with Modi, I mean, we've seen the largest strike this year in human history. Absolutely phenomenal that 300 million people were involved in the general strike. And of course, the farmers more recently have won a great victory in India and pushed that regime back, and Modi had to capitulate. So the working class is truly, the protests are international, and I would say that the role of women has been central in that. I mean, women make up more than 50% of the working class of the world, and you know, they've come to the forefront in places such as Honduras. Very, very recently, Castro of Libre won a decisive victory, which ends 10 years of rule of the right. I think we have to watch out there, because the US imperialism may start to involve itself once again in places like Honduras, in case it never went away, actually. So while revolution is in the air, so is counter-revolution. You know, that Trump said that he may throw his hat in the ring again. I think it's pretty certain that he will do. That would have far-reaching consequences if he won in America, in terms of the possibility of a civil war. But the impact of that across the world would be enormous. His victory would really give confidence to the far right internationally. And there's certainly anti-refugee, anti-migrant movements. I mean, we see that here in the UK, and I know comrades in France and Greece, etc., have too. So we are seeing the far right organising itself. So there's some key issues and key questions this afternoon that I hope everybody will make a contribution. I know they went out in the notification for the meeting, so I'll just mention a few of them. Will there be another global financial crash? I think that's a pretty central discussion point. How deadly is the new COVID? Is this the big one, or is it just a continuation? And will there be more? Is the system capitalism on its last legs? Can we avert climate change? And if so, how do we do it? So this is an open forum. I'm going to give everybody about 6 or 7 minutes. If people want to come in a second time, that will be fine. But I will give preference to those people who are speaking for the first time. I hope people understand that. John Gibson, you're first up, comrade.
Okay, Carol, comrades, thank you very much for the introduction, Carol. And I just wanted to emphasise the point that you made in your introduction there, that one of the greatest victories that we've seen this year has been by the millions, the 300 million that you referred to, taking part in action in India and knocking back the Modi government in doing so. That's reflected here by an increased level of industrial action across our various sectors. We saw bin workers in Brighton gaining a victory, which repaid dividends in terms of benefits for the workers across the council in Brighton. We've seen UCU workers taking part in industrial action, universities and colleges up and down the country. And each of these is a sign that, in spite of the fact that the Labour Party has been occupied by reactionary forces, that the working class are able and willing to stand up against the bosses in this country. And we see victories across the world in elections, in Venezuela, in Honduras, that you've mentioned. And so whilst in our own country here in the UK, we've had some setbacks with the appointment of Starmer as leader of the Labour Party. I say that with scorn, really, because he's leading it into the drain and dividing it down every single line he can do, and putting himself on the wrong side of every battle that comes before us. However, that's all I'm going to say for now. Give plenty of time for others to make contributions. If I can come in later, that'd be great. But thanks for your introduction, Carol, and great to see all the comrades here.
Thank you, John. I'm going to take Leslie Mahmood.
Yeah, just on the point that that John's made, it's interesting as well that I think John Ryman posted the article about, was it John Ryman or was it John Dunn? I think I'm getting mixed up. It's a long day. Anyway, about various industrial battles and successes with the new leadership of Unite, Sharon Graham. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. But obviously, it's about giving people confidence as well that you can actually have industrial battles, because I think there's quite a varied mood in different parts. So, for instance, we've been leafleting hospitals and NHS workers this last week or so, and we've had, on the one hand, midwives in one local hospital made their own posters for a midwives vigil organised by midwives themselves, and made their own banners and posters and marched out of the hospital in their uniform and stood outside, about 40 odd of them, which is amazing. But on the other side of the river, on my side, the midwives were so terrified that they asked our campaign to basically organise the vigil publicly, if you like, be the front organisation for that. And they wouldn't even come on the platform because they were so terrified of the bullying of management, and we had to restrict people taking photographs so that women would only have the placards in front of their faces, because they didn't want to be identified by the local bullying management, and management have tried to chase us off various hospital sites because they're terrified of us just turning up and giving their staff leaflets. So there's quite a mixed there's quite a mixed move. On the other hand, we've had several, that UCU in Liverpool University has had disputes all year round, and they actually won a major victory over management. So I think that's quite a mixed picture. But just on the this issue of health and the new variants, you do get a bit of a feeling of deja vu with Omicron. Now, it could develop into something, it might not. But it's an absolute classic again of the whole way that the crisis has been handled and the pandemic's been dealt with, because Western capitalism has grabbed all the vaxes, big pharma's hanging on to the patents and refuse to share those. In the UK, 100 million vaccination doses were destroyed, poured down the drain, basically, because they'd run out of date. And isn't that an absolute scandal when that could have vaccinated loads of people, say in South Africa and other places? But it's just a typical of blind attitude and short-term attitude, because obviously the pandemic, it doesn't recognise international borders, and it's turning around, and it may well turn around to bite them on the bum again in terms of the economy. And obviously here, our idiots in charge, our local idiots in charge, Johnson, is trying to pretend, well, everything's going to be all right for Christmas. We can spread it around, and it looks like it might be highly spreadable. And then we'll worry about it later. But again, that could start closing whole sections of the economy down again, schools closing, all the rest of it. And that whole refusal to take even a basic public health approach, so short-sighted in terms of capitalism. But I just want to finish on the point that that we've had a lot of discussion on international issues, and Carol was so right to point out some of those victories, because the back down of Modi over the Indian farmers just barely got a mention. Honduras barely got a mention. There's been apparently a massive demonstration in Bolivia against the right, something like 180,000 people. Don't think that got a mention at all. And I think it's really important to kind of raise the sights, because although we've had some, really terrible dangers and reactions like the Trump stuff, other parts of the globe, it's not all it's not all doom and gloom. So that gives us hope, I think, as well, for being able to spread the word, and also to tell workers here, sometimes quite often, if you fight, you can win. But obviously that's not the message that the bosses of capitalism or of the labour movement currently, in terms of Starmer and the Labour Party, etc. They don't want us to hear that message. So thanks, and looking forward to a few more battles in the new year.
Thank you very much, Leslie. David Hempson next.
Yeah, thanks for your introduction, Carol. That's that really gives us something of a map of what's happening. And Leslie, for your points, just to add one point, right now in South Africa, there are massive demonstrations against Shell Oil, which is trying to undertake prospection over out of the pristine Wild Coast, an area which the ANC has targeted, that is the ruling party has targeted for mining development and for the destruction of the natural environment and of all traditional resistance to intervention in that area. And it's marvelous because although most of the environmentalists are white, the base of that is black. African people who are refusing to see their communities and their environment destroyed in one of the most beautiful places the world has ever seen. So, you know, there's all kinds of movements now, and we'll look forward to seeing, you know, the results. And, you know, this year has been momentous in this way. World capitalism has declared that it's going to undertake the most fundamental reform yet in human history. Capitalism has undertaken reforms of a kind. I mean, slavery was abolished on the 28th of August, 1833. And in that same year, child labor wasn't abolished, but at least there were decisive movements from the bourgeois to stop child labor. Those were reforms that capitalism has undertaken, and there've been very little since. Every other reform has had to be fought bitterly against the bourgeois itself. But now the bourgeois have declared that they are going to change the power system of each capitalist country, or at least certainly the major capitalist countries, in fact all, from being based on coal to being based on renewables. This is unprecedented in human history, that there would be such radical change taking place at the fundamental foundations of the economy. For instance, in Germany, at the moment, there's something like a 50% dependence on coal and on gas. And in fact, if you add gas, I think it's up to about 60%. Now, in 8 years, the current government has predicted and has promised that it's going to be completely dependent and only solely dependent on renewables. I don't think we've seen, if that's to happen, I don't think we've seen anything like the change that's likely. And this so-called green transition will be an incredibly turbulent period, because there will be power outages. There will be all kinds of movements taking place over the time. And if I could say, I appreciate the points that Leslie's made in terms of the maldistribution, that the vaccines have moved on the basis of market forces. In other words, if you don't have the cash, you don't get it. That's what's happened throughout Africa and South Africa. But then how is the system fighting back? How's the virus fighting back? Where there is no vaccination, it's producing new variants. I hate to say it because I'm a South African, but we are the epicenter of 3 pandemics. We have more HIV/AIDS people who are suffering from that disease, which is no vaccination for that. And we've got more people in TB than anywhere else in any other country in the world. And there are no vaccinations against that, which are effective. And now we've got COVID. And the two existing pandemics are now being overlaid by the third. And I hate to say it because those are my people, that's my country. But we are staggering from one pandemic to another. And in that process, we are producing variants of TB, tuberculosis, which the world has never seen before. That's a fact. We're producing variants of HIV, which are also unheard of before, although they're somewhat treatable. And now we're seeing new variants of COVID. So in other words, we are suffering from the law of combined and uneven development. Imperialism created South Africa. It forced us into mining production with massive coal mines and the rest, and to gold mines, which were critical to the imperialist system, particularly in the 1920s and 30s. And then out of that, we've created a system in which there's no real public health system at all, and which there's growing divisions and misery. But enough on South Africa. We'll talk about that probably on another occasion. I just want to give something of a report or a thank you to the comrades of WIN. You haven't seen them, but the comrades of the Rohingya have been are trying to keep in touch. They are, just remember that the Rohingya refugees, well, they're not even regarded as refugees. The people who are living, the Rohingya living in Bangladesh, are not allowed to engage in education. Middle school, high school education is prohibited for Rohingya. And yet our comrades are trying to do that, trying to undertake that effort, and they are having opposition, from the existing authorities and also from bandits inside the Rohingya community. And a number of Rohingya leaders have been killed in the past period. And there have been fires. There have been fires virtually throughout the whole area, which have been deliberately set in motion. And what have we done? We've contributed. We've given, we've helped build a fire defense system among the Rohingya. We've presented them with money to be able to buy fire extinguishers, which are very expensive, and to get buckets of water and sand, to be able to engage in protection of their homes and their communities. And I want to thank the comrades, because many comrades have given very generously to that. So in other words, we're a network, but where the cries come out for help, we've responded, and I think we've done quite well. Let me just conclude with this. Let me just make one more point and then conclude. We're seeing reaction mobilized throughout the world. We've seen enormous movements which are demanding democratic and social change on a scale which has never been seen before in the world. But in opposition, we've seen the mobilization of reaction in a very complex ways. And I won't dwell on this, because we'd rather look at the other side for now. But just to mention, in the United States, we've seen now that the right of women to have control over their bodies, to be able to have an abortion, is being taken from women. Every reactionary movement is a patriarchal movement. Women have come out in massive support for social change, and the response from reaction is to say, women, get back in your place, and by the way, all the rights you've had are now going to be taken from you. That's the message from the right wing in the States, and they're carrying it out. Trump promised the Catholic Church that he would put Catholic people onto the Supreme Court, and that those people would then ban abortion. And he's done it. And now we are about to see this taking place. It's unbelievable. 50 years after the right has been gained by American women, it is to be taken away. And at the moment, we've not seen yet the effective mobilization against that. We've seen the mobilization of vigilantes. Every shooter in America has been a male. These massacres that are taking place are not massacres by women. It's massacres by men, crazy young fellows who are encouraged by their parents, it seems, as in Michigan, unbelievable, who give them their guns, and when they have a problem, encourage them to take it out, to sort out the problem by a little massacre here and there. It even makes racism and craziness that we've had in South Africa look tame by comparison. And against this chaos, we see the existing reformist groups, the Biden and so forth, faltering and not taking the action to defend working people. And that has to come back to the mobilization of the working class and our working class women to be able to resist that. Just in conclusion, though, I see that the date at which slavery was abolished as the 28th of August, 1833. And I was listening to a discussion on what happened in Barbados and elsewhere. And they mentioned that not a single slave around the world would, on the 27th of August, would have believed that slavery would have been abolished on the 28th of August. No one would have believed that that was possible. But it was possible through the massive mobilization of working people, of all kinds of individuals, and of slaves themselves, freed, those who had been freed and those who were unfree, to make that demand. In other words, a system which was seen to be absolutely immutable, was destroyed, the system of slavery. And we have to then see that as the light which is given to us in terms of mobilizing for the abolition of wage slavery, which is what the working class is laboring at the moment. And that is possible, but it's going to mean huge movements and huge change.
Okay, David, you've had your time now.
Okay.
Thank you, David, and particularly thank you for the report on the Rohingya and the impact that wind has had there. It's very important. Okay, so I'm going to now take Matt. Okay. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, no, I think there's some really interesting stuff, obviously, and the trouble is, of course, to try and pack it all into 6 minutes. I think in response to a couple of points that comrades has just made, the interesting thing, of course, is that if you look at vaccines and treatments for disease, both that the thing is that, of course, this was driven by public investment. Precisely that. If you look at particularly in the case of the AstraZeneca vaccine in this country, it was actually manufactured or at least invented in Oxford University and then given on the insistence of Johnson to Big Pharma for free. That's happened all over. That sort of thing, that they've just given away copyright and the rights produced by public academia to private profit is all over this. The other thing, of course, is, as a comrade points out, in terms of TB, of course, there have been no new treatments for TB since the 50s. Because, of course, it is, as far as the Big Pharma is concerned and the major capitalist countries, a disease of poor people. So why would they be interested in it? Obviously, then, of course, it means, as a comrade states, that, of course, that this comes back. It will, obviously change, and we'll get, as we are starting to see, TB, which is resistant to all the drugs that are being used, have traditionally been used against it. The thing also the comrade stated in terms of the move away from coal and towards renewables. I work in the sector, and I've seen the report saying that this year a record amount of renewables has been installed in the world, which is 250 gigawatts. The estimate to fulfill the actual requirement is that 3 times that has to be installed every year from now. If you look at that sort of as an effort, and clearly that's not going to be done. I highly doubt that's going to be done, that they're actually going to manage to treble that installation of renewables, principally, of course, wind and solar, in order to cover that over the next period. So that's another question. I think that, obviously looking at the state of the world and the chaos, obviously created by the gross crisis of capitalism. Almost the word crisis isn't enough now. The depth is such, and the lack of any solution, and the fact that clearly the thing is actually openly in decline, the whole thing, and the centre of it, of course, is the US as the hegemon, and it's actually the decline and the destruction of that system of control, the system of imperialist control, which is centered obviously in Washington, is central to the whole process. And we can see it, you can see it everywhere. The breakdown of US domination, the increasing argument between the imperialist powers, the inability, obviously, the move by the US in itself to away from democratic forms, even basic democratic forms, and thus we see, obviously the moves by the Republicans, when the Republican Party itself, with no resistance, no serious resistance by the Democrats, to move to anti-democratic forms. Even we can criticize the nature of bourgeois democracy in the US. but it's actually moving in the other direction. Clearly, as a method of control, and to then remove large sections of even the deeply flawed bourgeois democracy that exists, and so as has been said, as was said by one of the Supreme Court justices, look, how can the Supreme Court survive the manoeuvre of removing abortion rights? How can it survive? I mean, because obviously the effort by the far right to instate these people who are basically can be seen obviously by most people as mad, to take this right away from the population will destroy the credibility of the system in the eyes of the bulk of the population of the US. And this further exacerbates the crisis. And they don't have a solution. Clearly, also at the same time, finance capital continues to be the point of further crisis, and they haven't resolved any of the issues that were brought up by 0708. And in fact, we just wait on another collapse. A worse collapse. There's no question that will happen. I think the other point that we have to see is the method of control used, which is at the moment is to use the bureaucracy of assorted work of the assorted organisations, particularly, of course, the trade union bureaucracy, and we can see this everywhere. This layer is being used extensively in order to try and contain workers' struggles, in order to prevent them from taking place, to contain them when they do take place, to curtail them when they do take place. And this is a whole process, and you can see this all over the place. I mean, Comrade was talking about the whole question of the health service in this country, in the UK, and clearly that that has been left to isolated groups of people. Campaign. There's been nothing at all, zero from the unions, and we can see this from in all over. That in fact, of course, we have strikes. As the comments said, we have strikes breaking out, but they are contained, they are squashed. Workers are not achieving anything like the rate of inflation, even in wage increases. They're not, and further attacks are being forced down. The unions are conceding on questions that when they come through things like the fire and rehire tactic. In fact, what they're doing is they're just saying, well, we can give you all that money that you want anyway off the back of the workforce. Rather than you fire and rehire people, we'll just give it you. In the US, you can see a whole series of strikes in which, basically the workforce has been quite willing to go out and fight, and has done so in many cases, but where that bureaucracy has then been used to drive through, appalling agreements and to restrain, the working class itself. And the question is, okay, how then? How much longer can that process continue?
Could you conclude?
And at what point does the working class start to break through that? And the final point I would make very briefly, of course, is what it comes down to is the political expression of the working class. When does the working class itself begin to evolve its own political revolutionary expression, which is utterly critical to this, and which is the missing element? Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I just want to say something at this point. I do take your point about the bureaucracy of the trade unions, but I just want to say that we have got some rays of hope in this country, in the UK, with the election of Sharon Graham to unite, and with people like Ian Hodson of the Bakers Union being expelled in the middle of the Labour Party conference. The withdrawal of funding. I'm sure John Dunn will want to come in a bit and say something about that, because I think that does give us some hope. But the grassroots, we are winning on fire and rehire. We are winning. And I know Sharon Graham's working to take on Amazon on this. She'll be working with the best in the American trade union. So I'm going to bring in two and I've got quite a few people with their hands up, so I'm going to bring in the comrade on Trinity's iPad and then Larry, and then I've got 4 more that I'll take in twos. Now, I agree, Sharon Graham is not a saviour, but she's there to represent her people. And I think she's started her first 100 days actually doing that on picket lines, not in cosy rooms having sandwiches with Keir Starmer. I mean, who'd want to do that anyway? Okay, comrade on Trinity's iPad, it's over to you.
Right, just want to say a few words about India. Definitely the capitulation of Modi in withdrawing his plans to reform the agricultural sector are a victory. But I think it should be taken, if you like, in a broader light. Modi is facing 2 major elections at the present time, one in Punjab and the other, I can't remember the state, Maharashtra, I think it might be. 2 major states in India. So rather than go to an election where I think 65% of the Indian population live on the land, so that is a major issue. And as in Modi's terms, he withdrew that particular law, but the strikers have a whole list of demands that Modi, if you like, has skated over. He's not addressed them. The first one is the strikers don't only want, if you like, the capitulation to big business in agriculture, but they want a guaranteed price for the produce they produce, you know, for their various things, whether it be wheat, milk or whatever. And Modi's not addressed that. Modi has been faced with demands that strikers who've died during this long dispute, their families should receive compensation. He also has been faced with demands that people who've been jailed are freed. And one of the issues that came up a couple of weeks ago was the fact that a junior government minister ran down one of the strikers and killed him. And the strikers are demanding, one, that government minister be brought to book, be dismissed and be brought to book. Now, Modi has skated over all those issues, which are, if you like, the backbone of the strikers' demand. He said, right, we're not going ahead with this capitulation to big business. And I think we should be looking very carefully at India to see what reaction is taken from the strike committees, because quite clearly during a strike like that, there's been ferment within the agricultural sector. What do they want to see? Not just what do they want to avoid, which is that capitulation to big business. Another issue I'd just like to touch on is, if you like, the criminal sort of cringing of the Labour leaders. When Keir Starmer was elected, my brother and myself sent Keir Starmer a letter because it was in the middle of the crisis around PPE. And we said we'd never seen such craven, if you like, leadership in the Labour Party as that of Keir Starmer. The whole of his attitude at that time, which was in the early part of 2020, was let us help you. This was at a time of massive corruption where PPE was being bought from jewelers in Miami, was being bought from Turkey, where wrong, if you like, specifications were put, and the Turkish government said, we have complied with everything you've asked for, and where you had government ministers getting their friends to tender, or not even tender, get contracts for PPE, much of which had to be destroyed. And now you see the situation where the Labour leadership have an absolutely craven policy. On the television the other day, it was stated that 55% of Muslims that had been polled thought Labour was anti, if it was pro Islamophobia, that they were doing nothing to destroy that. And I think that's one small indication that the Labour leadership are absolutely craven. And one of the real difficulties in our area, there are no meetings taking place. If there are, they're on Zoom and very difficult to get involved in. And I think myself that as far as we can, we should be putting real demands on the Labour leadership that, you know, the positions, one, that they have a duty. And another issue that has raised its head that the Labour leadership should be back into the hilt is the fact that the patents on vaccines should be lifted, particularly for the global south, because there are firms in South America, in Africa and Asia, India, you know, that could produce these vaccines. But the big obstacle is the fact that the pharmaceutical companies are saying, no, these are our prerogative. And as was mentioned earlier, millions of vaccines are being destroyed because they're out of date. You know, it's an absolute scandal. And it would appear that this Omicron seems to be a milder version. But what happened if it had been a really virulent version? And you have South Africa, you know, less than half vaccinated. I'll leave it at that, comrades.
Just point out on the question of the letter to Starmer, the purpose was to circulate it in the party, not a thought that Starmer was going to take a blind bit of notice.
Thank you very much, comrade, for that contribution. And our next speaker is going to be Larry. Larry Hyatt, over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl. I want to touch on a number of issues that comrades have raised. And I hear what you're saying in relation to Sharon Graham. And I think that the problem we may have in Unite, and I'm a member of Unite, is that we will look to Sharon Graham as we looked in the Labour Party to Jeremy Corbyn. And unless, of course, we build around Sharon on the industrial front and build an element of militancy in it. And one of the things is that we've seen in Hastings, where I am fairly close to, the Britain First picketing the RNLI lifeboat people against the salvation of the refugees. And unless we raise within the trade union movement the development of internationalism, has to be galvanized with trade union recruitment of youth workers, youth workers, not youth workers, but youth within the trade union movement or within the workforces. We seem to be failing on that front. The youth seem to have more interest in campaigning on the environmental front, seen as more important and separate from the class struggle in the workplace. These are the elements that we want to try and develop through Sharon Graham. I mean, I've written to Sharon Graham this week, inviting her to come down and speak at a public meeting in Hastings on this very subject about youth joining trade unions and the development of educational programs around class struggle. Regardless of the issues that are facing us on the youth front are the fire and rehire, 0-hour contracts and part-time workers. And when I speak to workers in some of these supermarkets, they said that if they were offering full-time jobs as opposed to part-time and 0-hour contracts, they'd have a queue of workers round the corner, you know, stretching right round the block to take up full-time work, but they don't. They're offering these seasonal and short-term situations within the working environment, certainly in Hastings and surrounding area. And what I find is that we're losing a link between the veterans in the industrial world, which is people that are on trades councils, and the loss of understanding and the building of continuity between youngsters. And when we see the Trades Council, the attendance of trade union branches and lots of workers prepared to take up responsibility in the workplace. And when I've spoken to 2 workplaces recently, one's in the post office and one's what we used to class as dustmen, refuse collectors, and they've all lost their shop stewards because there's no real fight and seen as a class struggle. The shop stewards are taking all the flack, and people are not prepared to take it up. Those responsibilities. The development of socialism has to be linked to true democracy, and if the trade unions don't have the democracy to fulfil the aspirations of the workers in the workplace, then why would they be standing? And we're seeing more and more republics developed on an international basis, but they're not republican democracy. They're not from the bottom up and accountable. I mean, we saw one recently, I think it's in the Virgin Islands, where Prince Charles went out and said, "Thank you very much, you know, you're leaving the crown, but you're going to have a republic." But there's no such thing as a Republican socialist democracy. It's all based on the status quo, and it's not challenging anything at grassroots level, both on an international basis or in the workplace or on a national basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larry. John Ryman, are you ready to come in? Can't see John. I'll go straight to you then, Themos.
Yes, I think the most in the past year we have seen phenomena that point to drastic changes in the capitalist system. I mean, it's a capitalist system that's far, far in decay, and changes are happening, real changes. Now, the phenomena such as the fact that fossil fuels are being discussed, it is discussed that fossil fuels should be phased out. It's not something that we should take lightly, because there is a real move towards that situation, and the basis for this is that not all capitalists have to gain from fossil fuels. The vast majority of capitalists they are going to oppose this change, but the capitalists that really matter, the big monopolies, I think they are moving towards that. And I mean, neither Amazon nor Elon Musk, not any of these big capitalists care whether it's fossil fuels or renewables. So they will try to bring in renewables. And even the energy companies, they will just balance out what is best for them. And they are doing real research on renewables. Let's not underestimate that. At some point, some of them are going to turn to renewables as their main profit-making work. So we are moving towards that. And this will mean the destruction of thousands and thousands of smaller capitalists all around the world. So it's something that we have to discuss and see what's happening. The same we can see in the case of COVID-19. The reaction to COVID-19 has been destruction for many capitalists, but again, not the big ones. They are not losing out. So we are moving to something really different, and that different capitalism we are going towards is going to have the big monopolies calling the shots and not the vast majority of capitalists. Also, it's very, COVID-19 has another side that is ominous. I mean, the far right is coming out in defense of human rights. Can you believe that? And this is something that goes together with all sorts of rubbish about the vaccines, about chips, about all sorts of reactionary conspiracy theories. But they are also having an echo in people's consciousness, because they see in them people who are fighting for their rights. And this is because the left has failed to take up this flag. It has failed to propose ways and to fight against the authoritarianism that is being proposed by governments all over the world to deal with COVID-19. And I think this is one of the most important issues in the last year. Thank you.
So Finn, over to you, comrade.
Comrades, earlier speakers have dealt very well with the period we're living in and the crisis of capitalism and the failure of reformism and the need to have an international revolutionary socialist party, which can be kicked off in any country at the moment where events could well result in the formation of a socialist revolutionary movement, which then would have an effect across the globe. But the point I want to make is that even at this juncture, given the failures of reformism, the opportunities to break with the policy of the past comes up again and again and again. There was a time when the majority of European countries were led in terms of government by socialist parties and Labour parties. And it wasn't just in Europe. In South America, we had the events in Chile, Argentina, Peru. We had the ANC in power in South Africa. So again and again, opportunities were presented and they were turned down. But at the moment, I want to have a look at some of the opportunities that currently are presented. The Social Democrats are now in the majority party in Germany. After 14 years of the Christian Democrats, Merkel suffered a defeat, and Social Democrats are in power. They've put forward a progressive left-wing type program in order to achieve that election. Now, they have to break with the policies of the past. They have that opportunity to make that break. In Sweden also, there's a Social Democratic Prime Minister, at the present time in conflict with the Sweden Democrats, the fascist party in Parliament, who defeated her budget. She now can mobilize the left in society, the workers in society, to defeat that. So the opportunities come again and again. But even in France, I was reading recently, the right, that's the far right, that's Zemmour and Le Pen, have around 36%, which of course is a minority. And the old Gaullist movement, Les Républicains, is now in crisis. They can't even agree themselves on their candidates. So the opportunity for a left-wing movement to grow is very much present in so many countries. In Spain and in Portugal, the Social Democrats are in government. But then there are places where the socialists have failed so badly, socialist parties have failed so badly that they no longer have a presence, like in Italy or in France. But that doesn't mean the opportunities don't present themselves for the formation of a new revolutionary movement. And there have been times in the past when leaders have broken, social democratic leaders have broken with the policies of the past, like Mitterrand in France, when he was first elected. Mind you, he went back on all his policies shortly after election. Or Attlee in Britain in 1945, or for that matter, and more recently, we had Corbyn. It's a disgrace that in Britain, given such a foolish and lying and deceptive government such as we have under Johnson, that the Labour Party is storming into power. The government should fall. Under normal conditions, Johnson, he'd have to bring, the government should collapse and the Labour Party should be just walking into power, because that's not going to happen because of the total failure of the leadership at the present time under Starmer to make any kind of inroads at all on the capitalist system. 11 times the Labour Party have been in government in Britain. It's disgraceful that there is now socialism after 11 opportunities, nor have been left-wing movements and left-wing trends and even left-wing governments, like in the case of Italy. And we still are where we are now. But the Labour Party could well just fade in, I mean, they won't disappear, but fade into kind of oblivion in terms of forming a government. So there's opportunities presenting themselves all the time for the left-wing leaders, as so-called, or the socialist leaders, so-called, to make that break. And they don't do so. And the pressure for them to do so needs to be built up, particularly from within the trade union movement, because that's where the real power now rests in society. The trade union movement internationally has to insist on certain policy programs and certain policy platforms. There have been opportunities in other countries, of course, as well, like in Greece with the Syriza party in power and so on. But they're also, the right isn't winning all their battles either. They're also in crisis. Now, I gave the example of Les Républicains in France who are in crisis, but all the right wing in Britain, Johnson is just hanging in there because the Tories don't know where to go next, and the Labour Party can't challenge him. So the opportunities are presenting, and that's the point I want to make. To prevent disillusionment and further retreats, it is necessary that these places where the social democrats, such as in Germany, are in power, that the break is made with the old capitalist system, and that they stick by the policies that got them elected. That's the only point I want to make. So to prevent further disillusionment, the so-called Labour and socialist leaders have to make that break, and not think that everything's going to fall into their lap just by continuing on with the old policies that were pursued in the past. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you very much, Finn. I'm now going to hand over to Ed.
Thanks, Carol. Well, I think a lot of the comrades who've contributed to this discussion have given really good illustrations of the huge lack of confidence there is in existing political institutions, the industrial action that's flowing from that, the anger that there is, which I can see myself as well in the northeast of England, where some ex-mining communities, they have people in those communities who are living in conditions really like third world countries because of the 3 generations since the defeat of the miners' strike, having been punished with poverty, unemployment, degradation of the areas, and so on. Themos is also right that there are huge implications for the green transition. On a capitalist basis, of course, a transition, when capitalists pick it up, the idea of moving to green energy, it leads to a huge amount of redundancy. Of course, on a socialist basis, with the principle of redeployment and reskilling, it needn't lead to any redundancy at all. It could contribute to the development of improved living standards. And we've seen, as comrades have illustrated, strike action, resistance to the right, and so on. The question in my mind, and I think a big question for this meeting, which was implied by Karel's introduction, how does the working class move from anger and protest to offensive? How does it move from the conditions we're in now, where there's a lot of grumbling and discontent, to actually being organized enough to succeed in doing something to fight back against this situation? And it's worth remembering for conditions for revolution. Lenin said that, first of all, the ruling class has to be no longer able to control the situation. And we see that, I mean, we've seen it with what the comrades have said about Modi. We see it here in the UK with the Boris Johnson government, completely unable to deal with the problems that are facing society. Lenin said the middle class has to be in a situation of vacillation. Well, in many cases, the children of the middle class, it's not just vacillation. They now identify with the need for socialism. I mean, there was a poll in Britain not so long ago that showed amongst the under 40s, something like 70% of the population thought that socialism was a better alternative than capitalism. And the working class, this is the point that Lenin made, that I don't think there's been deindustrialization and the workers have been disoriented. What Lenin said, the working class has to be so determined to struggle for a new society. In my opinion, one of the reasons there's a logjam politically, the collapse of the old workers' organisations that comrades have alluded to, and still a hope that things are going to get better. There have been generations where there's been progress, and now, you know, we've had about 20 years of falling living standards, and there's still a hope that things are going to get better, that it doesn't have to come to the crunch. But of course, things can change. In France, in 1968, within the space of about 2 weeks, society moved from stability and acceptance of the status quo to a complete revolutionary situation where Soviets were being set up and where de Gaulle, the leader, had to flee the country. It's entirely possible in the current situation that we may feel that we are waiting a long time for a break in the situation, and we may still have to wait. Politics can be a protracted process, but there may also be a sudden change in the situation where in one country somewhere, the working class, as they did in France in 1968, suddenly see the opportunity, and then very, very rapidly, things will change globally, and revolutionary opportunities will present themselves in a more concrete way. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Over to you, Aman.
Thank you very much. I think there's so much to say at the moment that every one of us is trying to touch on one corner or the other. The world has changed. Everybody knows it. I mean, the last, I think we could easily say, at least in the last year or two, the world has changed tremendously. Situations have changed. The fact that we are in a global economy has automatically meant everything is related to everything else, and any change anywhere is going to be felt with all its impact across the world. I just wanted to mention, in addition to everybody else, rather than actually say instead of, I think there have been changes. One of the things which I think is major change is across Middle East. Huge change. We're seeing huge protests in variety of forms across Lebanon. We're seeing it in Iraq. We're seeing it in Iran. We are still seeing, despite the rule of literally the most reactionary ones in Afghanistan, there is not a day that goes by without a demonstration of women in Afghanistan. And that's still happening across the whole place. We're seeing changes in terms of the protests everywhere. And I think it is true, let's say, from right away across the world. And that breath of fresh air, I think, is something we all can see. There is one thing else which I think is also more important, and that is inability of the traditional ways that bourgeoisie used to provide answers across many parts of the world. I think this is also has reached an end, and this is the time where we will see more of the Marxist approach and more of the left, upper left, and I mean the working class left is actually having more of an opportunity than it had before. There is none of the bourgeois typical alternatives that are actually providing any answer in any form of improvement, and I think this is one big change that we are seeing. And based on that, I'd just like to echo what was said earlier by one of the comrades. There is a lot of opportunity. There is a lot of ways to actually show inability of the capitalism to actually provide the necessities, and therefore there is room for growth. I think that is objectively true, and that objective needs to be materialized by actually formation of the unity in the working class in any part which is possible. So overall, I think we are, despite all COVID and despite everything else, politically, I think the world is very different to what it was before, and there is a lot to be done. And that's, I think, is the thing we see in perspective, and that's the opportunity which is available from all sorts of parts of the society. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Aman. All right, John, over to you.
Can everybody hear me? I've got bandwidth problems.
Yeah.
This renewable energy powered computer is absolutely shit. I'm going to try and get a coal powered one, a clean coal powered one, I should say. But, you know, I'm going to detract from the notes I'd made, because I thought, Karel, you know, you gave, we're reviewing the year, and you gave a very painted an optimistic picture about the and then all of a sudden, you know, the angels of doom have stepped in, that the earth's going to burn up in a few days, that we're all going to die of COVID or TB. When did Marxists become such miserable bastards? We're supposed to bring hope and offer an alternative. And, you know, I'm so glad that I mix a lot of my time with what I might call ordinary people, because I'm seeing all sorts of changes. That, you know, Sharon Graham, for a start, who I think in a few years' time will be mentioned alongside Arthur Scargill and Bob Crow as great leaders. In 100 days, Unite has smashed many bosses, has bought in pay increases of 17% for drivers, 11%, and now is building a transnational combine to take on Amazon. But we're supposed to think, oh, these people are just reformists, etc., etc. And talking about the people I mingle with, in the communities I spend a lot of time with, we're seeing community groups, we're seeing the best of people who are raising funds and food for families under hardship, but are also organising these community groups and standing for local council and replacing right-wing Labour councillors that they've never seen for ages. And, you know, I'm involved in a little extent in sending solid. The Alabama miners have been on strike for almost 9 months, and the entire snowflake left in America is ignoring them, because the miners and they're contributing to this burning that we're going to have in a few, and yet they're taking on the bosses. They've been bringing New York to a standstill. They've been learning lessons internationally. So I think it's a time of great hope. We don't want to be spreading this message of doom and gloom, because, you know, the Labour Party is dead and is being replaced. Resist, I think, are going to be a game changer alongside Sharon Graham. They're going to register as a party, but the aim is to build a movement, a grassroots movement that politicizes food banks, that politicizes local campaigns. So I'm not worried about bursting into flames when I get my clean coal-powered computer. I'm looking optimistically at the future, because that one thing alone, the election of Sharon Graham, against all the misogyny, all you've got to vote for the fraudster Becky, it helps, you'll split this and you'll split that. What a trouncing victory she won. You know, we've got hope at last, comrades. Trade union membership is rising. People are getting up off the knees. Let's concentrate on that for a bit. And Chesterfield are also in the second round of the FA Cup today, so we're going to give them a good cheer. Comrades, it's called solidarity. That's what we have to do. We have to show it everywhere we can, and we have to join the fight back and stop being miserable bastards. Let's have some fun.
Oh, thank you, John. Refreshing as always. Maddie, over to you, comrade.
I wanted to start in Sweden while we're on an upward beat. What happened in Sweden the past 10 days, I think, could only happen here. The 8 parties in the Swedish parliament, 4 of which are conservative. One of these is Nazi. And 2 of them are sort of left. One is left. It's the Left Party, and they have basically they're a social democratic party, the way the Social Democrats were 50, 60 years ago. Their demands are for decent pensions, proper hospital care. They're looking after the small person's rights. Then we have the Social Democratic Party, which is a minority party. I think it has about 34 or 38% of the vote, which is why it's always been forced, well, in recent years, the past 7 years anyway, been forced into a coalition. And the other 2, and the members of the coalition were not the Left Party. It was the Centre Party, which has roots in a farmers' movement. And it was the Environmental Party, the Greens. And one way and another, the Greens and the Centre Party fell away. And Margareta Andersson, the new Prime Minister, was actually elected by default because the right-wing parties couldn't gather enough no votes, so that the yes and the abstainers actually, or no commenters, I think is probably more correct, were in the majority, and so she's now the Prime Minister. But since that election, which was only 6 days ago, Monday, a poll has come out showing that the Social Democratic Party is more or less the same, slight increase in popularity. The other 2 parties in the previous government have both fallen. The Centre Party by 4 percentage points, which of course is a big thing. And it looks as though the Greens may not pass if the election was held now, the Greens would risk losing their place in Parliament. There's a 4% barrier. And the amazing thing is that the left-wing party, the left party as they call themselves, has actually risen 4 or 5%. And in Stockholm, they've become the 3rd largest party. In the country, they're now the 4th. This is from a position where they've actually been locked out of government for the past 7 years. They have not been part of the cabinet. And their left party's budget is not, or budgetary demands has only very recently, in the past few weeks, been accepted, which, as I say, includes improvements in pensions. That was their demand. And they also managed to avoid a serious backlash a few months ago, which would have raised rents in public utilities, amongst others, which of course, I mean, the point of having public utilities as housing companies is to make housing affordable. So that's good news at the moment in Sweden if the trends continue. When it comes to COVID and the new Omicron, it's actually, I mean, you really need to control Johnson. He had obviously had a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that South Africa was the first country to describe the virus. South Africa was also the first country to describe the beta virus. And the reason that South Africa has these skills is something that David Hampson touched on. Namely, we've been dealing with a lot of medical emergencies like HIV and TB, and a number of, we've also contributed to sorting out things like dengue fever and other things that have appeared in Africa in the past 10, 20 years. We have skills in South Africa, and that is why we were able to identify the virus. But what I think is hopeful is that it would appear that that Omicron is not as nearly as deadly as previous variants of the COVID virus. And hopefully, being so transmissible, it might take over and we might actually get a virus that we can live with. And if we can get I mean, South Africa and Egypt and a couple of other countries have the skills and the facilities, we could make the virus, vaccines in Africa. But as you know, we're not being permitted. So that's also something that comrades could think of, trying to get vaccine knowledge to other countries. India, obviously, several countries in Asia actually could produce, if only one could get these vaccines off the big pharma. We want to become trillionaires, and you know, so that's what I wanted to say. It's a lot to do, but there are points where we can work in a positive direction.
Thank you very much, Maddie. I'm going to go to Susan now.
Okay. One, apologies for being late. I had a power cut and timing was not good. I think the way forward is about goals. We'd like everybody to be socialist, but what we have to do is push goals. At the moment, the biggest danger to any socialism in this country is the police and crime bill that is going to make protest of any form illegal. And if we want to sidevent that, I want to see a civil disobedience campaign, something that just simply stops doing the things that they want us to do, whether that's buying stuff in supermarkets. We can choose to not do the things that they rely on, to stop traveling abroad on cheap holidays, to stop doing the things that make, capitalism work, for goodness sake. So, Wednesdays, I would really like to see a national campaign, but we have to have goals that we support for everybody and work together with that. And I think that that's the way forward. And that's why Young Labour, when they say won't support, MPs, to just simply come out and say we won't support, we won't campaign, we won't support anybody who is crossing picket lines, who is, not supporting people that we believe in. That's a really good thing. So for my two penneth, I live in Devon. It's really Tory. I'm not going to watch, a Labour Party breakthrough, even if I'm not sure Ben Bradshaw is a Labour MP anymore, but that's another matter. But what I can see is that people will get behind warmer homes. They will get behind, green energy. They will get behind better food for farming. And that's why we need to do it. We need to support the socialist goals that make this work. And then we can stitch it all together and make sure and reveal it as socialism. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Susan.
The only other thing that I was going to say is that I absolutely supported Maddie about the vaccines. We need a campaign that is going to one, point out none of, we're not safe until all of us are safe. If we want to stop the variants, the only way to do that is to make the vaccines available everywhere, and that means waiving patents. But the other totally immoral thing that we are not getting through is, how dare we support countries like the US, which are continuing sanctioning countries around the world while they are supposed to be fighting a pandemic? Where's the moral outrage? And we could put it out on the social media, even if we can't get the media and the TV to back us on it. So I think there are much more opportunities for us to put pressure where it goes. But anyway, thank you.
One of the things we really haven't touched upon, he's waving at me. One of the things we really haven't touched upon, I think I tried to allude to it, perhaps not very explicitly, in my sort of introduction to the session, was the fact that we could see the assault on the 6th of January on the Capitol building. We could actually see that live. And I know that a film has been made of it. If you haven't seen it, it is worth watching, because social media has become so powerful that things are almost instantaneous. So while capitalism is international and the working class is international, we now have communication that's international, and it's very, very fast. All right, Roger, are you ready to communicate now?
I think it was a discussion that we can all be very proud of, because it was not just very good analysis and so on, but unlike in most political meetings that all of us have been to in the past sometimes, they were all original, thoughtful, creative contributions. And I'd just like to make a couple of points to kind of round things off. It's very hard to believe or to remember that 30 years ago, in 1991, there were serious capitalist commentators who were celebrating the end of history. We've had quite a bit of history in the years since then. But for decades, it's true that on the surface, there seemed to be little movement. But under that surface, subterranean contradictions were building up. But since the turn of the millennium, the surface calm began to be interrupted by the odd isolated shocks. The attack of 9/11 in 2001, the Iraq War in 2003, the financial collapse in 2008. There had been previously warning ripples, if you like, at the turn of the century in the sieges of successive gatherings of world leaders in Seattle, Prague, Genoa, etc. The waves of protest were then gathering momentum with the Arab Spring of 2011, the Greek uprising, and other, but still to a certain extent, isolated outbreaks. But the last 3 or 4 years have witnessed a more truly universal outbreak of mass protest than any, I think, that has ever been seen in history. If you take, the revolutions of 1848, they were confined to Europe. And even the revolutionary wave of 1917 to 19 was mostly concentrated in Europe. There were outbreaks, of course, big outbreaks in 1968, but they were largely confined to particular isolated flashpoints: France, Mexico, the ghettos in the US cities, Northern Ireland, etc. But now what we're seeing is throughout every continent, especially throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America, heroic displays of mass action by tens or even hundreds of thousands of people on the streets, and often victories like we saw recently, at least partial and temporary maybe victories, like in Sudan. Now, I was a little surprised when John Donne kind of implicitly accused us of being miserable, but we're usually attacked from the opposite point of view. We're usually accused of being too optimistic, or it's assumed that we sort of take final victory for granted. And that's absolutely not the case. The overthrow of capitalism will be a superhuman uphill struggle, the most difficult challenge in history. And there's absolutely no guarantee of victory, far from it. But what we are insisting upon is that this is only just the beginning. We're only in the very early first stages of this struggle. We have yet to see the worst that the enemy can throw at us. The horrors of the 20th century should be a constant reminder to us of that. But the ruling class too have yet to see the full power of the working class. That's why we keep emphasizing the innate hidden reserves of power that have yet to be deployed on our side too. The growth of the proletariat to encompass every continent and every nook and cranny of the planet. The spread of our class throughout the entire population, so that women today, far from being an adjunct, are in the forefront and the vanguard of the struggle. Above all, the unprecedented determination of the youth in an existential fight for their future, which for the first time in history they recognize as crucial for their survival. Ed quoted that survey, which is absolutely astonishing. 70% of youth in Britain and a similar percentage in the USA say that they want socialism, and it's defying all the predictions in the teeth of every conceivable distortion and slander and betrayal. But in all these surveys, a decisive majority favor socialism over capitalism. I think there's one major exception, ironically, and that's China. But civilization today is under threat as never before, from economic gridlock, from racism, militarism, fascism, from new and raging pandemics, from climate catastrophe, and so on. And that's why we in the Workers' International Network are deadly serious. Unlike so many other groups, we don't make grandiose pretensions. We don't masquerade like others in charades, acting out the role of a kind of puppet revolutionary vanguard. We're striving patiently and methodically, day by day, with analysis, with study, with arguments, with discussion, to help put together a genuine network, so far, of course, on a tiny, minuscule scale, but a genuine network of workers in struggle. We started with the goal of creating the first foundations for a future Workers' International, and as part of that in Britain, a genuine party of labour. And I feel proud of the fact of the, albeit tiny, but small but sure steps we are beginning to take towards both of those goals. And this is a necessary first step towards building a real worldwide party of the working class, which would number in today's conditions tens of millions. So we've yet to cover the first fraction of an inch. There are countless miles still to go, but the way we're doing it is, in my opinion, the only way to go. WIN exists as a forum in which we can all pool our common experiences, ideas and insights through regular exchanges and discussion. If you think of the conditions in which Marx and Engels had to operate, where even the simple communication required the utmost and strenuous efforts, and we enjoy the luxury of the brilliant technology of the age. But our task is basically the same as theirs was. WIN has conducted weekly meetings throughout the last 2 years, on the spot eyewitness reports from participants in struggles all over the world, by my estimation from 32 countries, from countries in North and South America, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia. Now, for the next 3 or 4 weeks, we're temporarily closing down our program of discussions, not only because I think we all need a well-earned break, but also to allow ourselves the opportunity to reflect and plan and prepare perhaps even greater leaps forward in the year ahead. And meanwhile, there's something that all of us can do, and I just want to remind comrades. First of all, catch up with any meetings you missed by watching our video recordings and reading other material on our website, which is www.onthebrink.online. Secondly, our journal On the Brink has resumed publication now. Issue 5 is available now in PDF format from the website. So I'd encourage all comrades who haven't done that to read it online, or download and print off copies for your own use and to distribute to your friends and comrades. Contribute your own articles, contribute reports, join our Facebook group and contribute to our Facebook page, and contribute also, I'd like to finish on this point, one-off donations and especially regular standing orders, please, to our bank accounts or via PayPal, details of which you can find on our website. So that is it. I see you comrades again early in the new year, and thank you for the amazing contributions you made to our understanding of what's going on in the world. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you very much, Roger. And can I just echo that? I think it's been absolutely amazing. While people have been talking, I've actually made notes because I know that I'm learning a lot here. So I've got 6 or 7 pages of notes here. So thank you very much. Absolutely brilliant contributions and analysis from everybody. And we'll see everybody in the new year.